who may not know James yet, James started with us only relatively recently, so maybe February, March time. So he is he's a fabulous new member of our team, and does very important mahi that I particularly like, because I'm in the same space as him. So over to you, James.
Cheers, Becky. Morena tātou. It's really exciting to be here this morning and share some of this whakaaro with you. Like Becky mentioned, we're going to spice up the structure a little bit today. So I'm only going to talk at you for maybe 15 minutes or so. And then I'll introduce the rest of our amazing panel who are kind of, there's not really much pointing, are they? They'll move around. There's a couple of faces on the screen that will join for a panel discussion for the second part of the workshop. But if you have any pātai throughout, feel free to chuck them in the chat, or we'll hopefully have quite a bit of time towards the end to have more of a kōrero about interviews as a Rangahau method. So I've just got a little presentation as a kind of an intro for us. So we're diving into interviews as a specific method of doing rangahau, and I've given away the spoiler on the front cover. You'll see Kimiora and Kiri will join me later on in this presentation. Ko waio, ko whangataua te maunga, ko kāriri kura te awa, ko tinana te waka, ko te rāroa me te aupori ngā iwi, ko Roma te marae, ko James Berghan tōku ingoa, no ahipara me te oniroa Toheahau. So I'm James. I whakapapa to te Tai Tokiro, the far north, and this is kind of my favourite photo of home. So we've got Whangataua and my maunga over on the right hand side there, and you can see the awa out to the ocean. And so this is at the southern end of Te Oniroa Tohe, or 90 Mile Beach, which is where I spent most of my time growing up, until I left for uni. But I'm currently based in Pōneke in Wellington, and this is what it looks like every day. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. It always looks like this. As Becky mentioned, I joined the team at Te Manawa Haukura in mid-February, and up at our Porirua campus this morning to kōrero with you. And I was thinking a couple of things that I'd really love for you to leave this workshop thinking, that guy really met my expectations. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set those expectations for you. And specifically, I'm going to lower them. No, seriously, I hope you get some good insights today, though, about interviews as a research method, and hopefully some practical tips as well if you're thinking about trying them out or trying out maybe a slightly different interview method as well. So heads up about where we're going, and what I hope you'll take away from this presentation is that hopefully you'll know a little bit more about the role of interviews, and particularly as a relational method, and as a kaupapa Māori aligned research method as well. And maybe a bit of a taste of some of the different shapes and formats that interviews can take. You'll be able to reflect on whether interviews might be suited to your own kaupapa or future kaupapa that you might be involved in. And then if you do go on to do interviews as well, I hope that you'll leave knowing a few things when it comes to planning and conducting your interviews. Cool. And hopefully that sounds good. So a little bit of a structure to help us get there. So I've broken this part up into 5 chunks. So I'll start with the basics. What even is a research interview? I'll talk about a couple of guiding principles. Then we'll get practical, so how do you plan for an interview, and thinking before, during, and after as well. I'll share a few case studies from my own mahi, particularly around the different forms, and then we'll share some stories from the field, and would love it if you got any pātai for us in that panel discussion too. So what is a research interview? And I guess at the simplest form, it's all about that co-production of knowledge through kōrero. So it's a qualitative research method for gathering information, for gathering insights, for gathering data about a specific topic or a specific study. Um, and one of the key threads, I think, from today's kōrero is that it's grounded in relationships as well. So the relationship between interviewer and interviewees as well. And when we're thinking about what is a research interview, I think it can be helpful to think what is not a research interview as well. So I tried to brainstorm a couple of suggestions on things that we might think of when we think interview, but they're not necessarily what we might class as a research interview. So research interviews not typically a media interview, so we're not primarily doing our research interviews to share information with the public. They're not primarily to entertain. We're trying to find out or build a story. They're not job interviews, so they're not necessarily focusing on someone's qualifications for a specific job. It's not a counselling session or a therapeutic purposes. They're not typically an interrogation or an informal chat. So those are all kind of separate things that we don't necessarily exclusively capture as a research interview. And I guess with the disclaimer that some research might explore each of these particular things in slightly different ways. But when we're thinking, if I'm conducting an interview, it's conducting something different than each of these things. So it's not quite the same. I think of a bit of a spectrum of the types of interviews that we can think about as well. So at one end, you might have quite a structured interview. And if you think of kind of like the census, if you were to do that verbally, that's an example of a structured interview. I don't know if anyone's been involved in the I was a participant once in the Te Kupinga social survey. So that was one of these really structured interviews. Someone came to my whare and sat down, but they had a very kind of strict list of questions they were going through. It's the same order every time, and they're kind of sticking to that script. And then I guess at the other end of the spectrum is an unstructured interview. So kind of more like that conversation with minimal prompting. You're sitting down with someone. You might have a kaupapa that you're engaging them about or talking to them about, but it's more like having a broad chat about that kaupapa. You're kind of just letting the conversation flow and see where it goes. And then in the middle, we might have a little bit of a mix. So there's another type called a semi-structured interview. So in a semi-structured interview, we might have a loose kind of guide of questions, a bit of a skeleton, but then it leaves it open to, if something comes up, you can kind of explore down that pathway a little bit more. So tell me a bit more about what that meant for you or what that means. And with a semi-structured interview, you might have the same skeleton for all of your interviews, but it really depends on the kind of the vibe and the relationship, and so the flow might change in different interviews. You might ask your questions in a different order than the previous interview that you did. Really about depending on the nature of that kōrero and how it's flowing. I'll share a little bit later on as well. For a lot of my projects, I kind of sit in the middle of the spectrum, so in that semi-structured interview space. They work really well for a lot of the whakaaro that I'm involved in, so having that kind of skeleton, but then also being able to go down different pathways as interesting things come up as well. But all possibilities, all variations are possible. The context that we do interviews might vary as well. So you might do an interview one-on-one with an individual, or you might interview pairs or groups of people together. You might interview a whānau together or a household, or more in that kind of focus group style, or even a wānanga setting as well. So the number of people involved can vary. Also, the format that we do our interviews can vary too. So we're seeing, I guess, more and more combinations of It might be an in-person interview, it might be over the phone interview, or over Zoom or over Teams like this. And a lot of it comes down to logistics as well, balancing what can work for different people and what the whakaaro is, what the purpose of your rangahau is as well. Personally, I still prefer a tinana or in person as much as possible, especially in a kaupapa Māori context. But yeah, sometimes logistics prevents that, and we've got to kind of use other options where we can as well. So just a couple of principles that have helped me guide my thinking around interview processes. And in a kaupapa Māori context, thinking about interviews not just as gathering data, but as that building and maintaining relationships and upholding the tikanga. A couple of key values that I lean on, I guess, are whanaungatanga, and hopefully you're looking at that symbol thinking it's a weird symbol to describe whanaungatanga. But it's thinking about that relationship as being both the outcome in an interview and the process of the interview, and so taking that time at the start of the interview to build a connection, to share whakawhanaungatanga, to kind of break the ice. And that's kind of where this little temperature metaphor comes in. I've put a reference towards the end of the slides as well to Kiri Dell's PhD thesis, where she talks about the temperature of the interview. And so taking that time at the start to do your kind of connection making, to warm up the interview, because you get totally different results and totally different whakaaro through your interview when the temperature of that interview is warm. And so trying to think, what are the things I can do to keep that interview warm and in a warm space, so that I avoid those kind of jarring moments where all of a sudden I've said something and the conversation's gone cold. And for me, that's sometimes having that really rigid structure. You might be having a nice conversation that's flowing along in this direction, and then all of a sudden you go back to your schedule and now we're sending you off back over here. And that can be quite jarring or change the temperature of the interview quite a bit. So that, whanaungatanga and that relationship and flow is kind of a key principle that I lean on. Aroha ki te tangata, so honouring the dignity and the pace of each person and people that we're engaging in and that we're kōrero with, that their kōrero they're sharing with us as a taonga. So kind of really trying to value that and look after it. It's precious. Manaakitanga. So back when I was doing my PhD, we kept talking about biscuit visits. So even though I might have a koha, like a voucher, to give participants for their time for taking part in the interview, for some reason I leaned on Mallow Puffs, but I just had a stash of Mallow Puffs in my car all the time for all these biscuit visits. And sometimes I wasn't even there for an interview. I was just bringing biscuits. But that thinking about how we host our research participants, how we listen, how we care in an interview matters as well. So really thinking about what tone we set, how you start, how you close, how you follow up, all of those aspects. And then finally, trying to get away from thinking about interviewees as subjects whose knowledge is there to be extracted, and more thinking about our participants in an interview as co-authors and co-producers of meaning and of knowledge. I've seen some really cool instances of this where, say, a participant might not be named in the research, they might all be anonymous, but rather than calling them participants, they've been called knowledge creators or knowledge collaborators or another term that kind of recognises that other kind of additional kind of value they're bringing, not just for that knowledge extraction in a sense. And Linda Smith has a great set of other values. These I just picked a few that that resonated with me, but then there's a whole kind of set of values that you can lean into to learn more a bit about upholding kaupapa Māori principles, and they translate really nicely to interviews and the interview process too. When you're preparing to do interviews, we can think about a couple of things, and I'll just touch on a few, but I think we'll draw out a few more of these as well in our panel chat. But just as a starter, thinking about what you might want to brainstorm or plan before an interview. So really thinking, what is my kaupapa, and is an interview a method that will help unpack and unravel that kaupapa and produce something new. And then once you've decided that interviews might be a good fit, thinking about who you'll interview, how will you get in touch with them, how will you recruit participants, where will you interview them? So will you go to their whare, or will they come to your whare or workplace, or some other kind of neutral venue, or will it be online or over the phone? And the ethical considerations as well. So if it's when we got Rangahau that involves participants, I don't know how to say human participants in a way that's not quite as clinical, but when we're researching with people, thinking about the ethics process as well. So that kind of helps step us through all of these questions too. During the interview, you might think about, am I listening more than I'm talking? I feel ironic right now because I feel like I'm talking a lot right now. Am I open to where the kōrero might go? What's the temperature of the interview like? Am I trying to keep it warm? And even the logistics of, is my audio recorder working? And I'm not sure if Kiri and Kimiora might have some interesting stories to share about some of those logistical elements of it as well. And then maybe after the interview, thinking about, and now that I'm looking at this, maybe these are some good things to think about before as well, but how will I honour the kōrero that I've received? So what happens next, and how can I treasure that and look after it and make sure I'm kind of doing right, that it's tika. Have I offered a koa? How will I analyse the data? How will I transcribe it? So turn it from verbal form into written form for further analysis, if that's something that you want to do. And then again, logistically, speaking from experience, have I immediately saved the recording so that you don't lose it? I just want to share a couple of case studies from some Rangahau that I've been involved in, and this is perhaps just going a little bit outside of the interview box as well. So interviews can take a whole bunch of forms that might extend beyond just sitting around a table perhaps and having a kōrero, which there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I just wanted to share some maybe different ways of weaving Rangahau into interviews too. So these are some photos from a method called the homing method, and this was carried out as an interview format, but with a tactile component. So we had these little wooden blocks, and each kind of group of participants, we did some as one-on-one interviews, but we also did some as group interviews. And whether it's a group or an individual, they've got 10 blocks to work with, roughly, and they're all blank when they start. And so the first task is to brainstorm all of the things that are important and what it means to be at home, what it means to have a safe home and to be well housed. And so you can see in the example on the top left there, we've got some of those key principles of like, it needs to be cozy, not moldy, warm, have a good shower, have a good kitchen, family, those kind of factors. And then once participants have labelled their blocks, then they build a tower. And so I've got a couple of examples of towers on the right-hand side. And the tower is a way to prioritise which of those factors are more important than other factors. I quite like the example in the bottom right. So they decided that all of their principles were equally important in terms of being well housed. And then the desk is the whenua. And so that was the foundation of what their house needed to be sitting on. So it was a quite nice metaphor for how they arranged their blocks. And I guess the context for this Rangahau project, you can kind of see the little traffic lights there in one of the photos too. That this was all about getting people to talk about housing assessment. So a lot of our housing assessment frameworks are really prescriptive, and they kind of tell you already what the measures of success are. And so this was a way that we could kind of break down what are those measures of success to you and what's important in a house to you, and then evaluate your house on those factors, and just having that tangible element of people being able to pick up blocks and move around. We're able to explore a lot of those kind of facets of decision making and prioritization, what things are more important than other things. And I think just that kinesthetic element of playing with the blocks and writing on them and building a tower made people a bit more relaxed as well. So it wasn't quite as daunting, I guess, as someone sitting there asking questions of you. Yeah. In a similar vein, so while the blocks were a bit more abstract, talking about kind of features of a home, we've also been trying to test out some tactile tools more specifically about the physical design of whare. So for context, my background is in papakainga and co-housing research and urban design. And so we used some other tactile methods. The ones on the top there are we were looking at massing. So each block represents kind of a different use. So you might have sleeping areas and cooking areas and stuff. So it's kind of at that broad scale. And then the image down the bottom shows basically a design your own floor plan for your whare. So we had the outline of the whare, but then it was totally up to our participants to design the interior of the house however they wanted. And so using that same thing as a tool that you can play around with and move things around and chat about as you're doing it as part of the interview was a nice way to explore some different design principles too. And then kind of following on from that, I guess at the next scale was going that level beyond that. So the kind of master planning, the big plan of whether it's the whole papakainga, or in this research project, we were designing an all abilities pathway. So for whānau hawa, whānau with experience of disabilities. And so having things like aerial photos and post-it notes and all of these, same thing, the tactile elements that people could almost in a way get distracted with and free them up a bit to explore different ideas. And then the kōrero that goes with that was really rich too. I did just want to touch on as well, there's a whole range of other methods as well, whether it's walking interviews or Deborah Heke talks about kori kōrero. So weaving in physical activity with the woman that she did her rangahau with. So lots of different ways that you can kind of take the interview outside of face-to-face Zoom on the phone as well. For all sorts of different reasons, and sometimes they won't suit a student kaupapa, but sometimes they're quite an interesting and novel way to draw out kōrero in different ways too. So I just put together a couple of kind of key references that sprung to mind as I was thinking through some of these slides, as maybe a starting point if you're interested in looking at any of these particular elements as well. So we'll make these available afterwards. But I think that might be the end of my little spiel about research interviews, and I'll stop sharing from here. Come back and have a bit of a kōrero as a rōpū as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is this where I come in, James?
Yeah, sure.
as the questioner. Very cool. Thank you. That was awesome, and it was really cool to hear the not just the sort of I guess some of the principles that sit behind good interviewing, but get those real life examples using other methods to sort of embellish the interview process. I wonder if we've got Kiri and Kimiora joining the panel now. I wonder if we start with you, Kiri, just a bit of an introduction for anyone who doesn't know you.
Kia ora, Becky. Kia ora koutou. Ahi Māori e, ko Waio, ko Kiri taku ingoa, he urio o Ngāti Maniopoto. Really looking forward to this panel kōrero. Just, I suppose, for a bit of context, my academic whakapapa, if you will, was in Indigenous psychology and community psychology as well. So I work in the spaces in around people and in around whānau, and ultimately supporting flourishing. Kia ora. Over to you, Kimiora.
Kia ora koutou. Can everyone hear me all right? My computer's been playing up. Ka pai. Ko Kimiora Raerino tōku ingoa, ko mā tātou e mea te aroa me koti mana ngā iwi. E noho ana au ki Tamaki Makaurau. I'm a latecomer to research, but I have been researching for, oh goodness, I worked it out this morning, over 16 years. It feels kind of weird because I know there's very experienced researchers in the room here, but James asked me, so oh well, I'll give you my kōrero on things. I've undertaken all types of interviews because I've also do it as contract research mahi, sometimes just to go in and do research. So I think I've sort of got a wide range of experiences from very much Māori-centred to Pākehā type research interviews. My preference, of course, is Māori-centred because I just sit comfortably in that space. But I have done, for want of a better word, some very Pākehā interviews that I found really weird. And I really like the temperature gauge that you showed, James, because that's really what I apply to my interviews as well. And I think it's a very important thing to think about, taking the temperature. So I consider myself to be a work in progress when it comes to interviews. I always learn new things. I get things wrong. I get things really right. And sometimes I make good friends. So that's me. Kia ora.
Awesome. Kia ora, Kimiora. And if you want to know more about Kimiora, there's been a recent story written about Kimiora's work on the Wānanga pages. So if anyone's got easy access to that, perhaps we can put that in the chat. So thanks also for talking a little bit about the types of research interviews you've done. I wonder if we can chuck that over to you too, Kiri, and just for you to talk about the types of research interviews you've done and what kind of research projects you've used or rangahau projects you've used interviews for.
Yeah, kia ora, Becky. I seem to find myself ending up in rangahau projects that are quite sensitive, sometimes controversial, and often quite heavy as well. So huge challenges and huge learnings in that. So just to touch on some of the rangahau that I have worked on. So my PhD looked at bicultural bereavement experiences. So that's talking to whānau that are both perhaps Māori and Pākehā, talking to them about their very kind of raw and real bereavement experiences. So quite a very kind of heavy, very, very sensitive and often quite tapu kind of space in which we were talking. I've also looked at projects in around supporting tāne who are perpetrators of domestic violence as well. So talking to them about their particular journeys families, how they were able to remove that from their whānau and remove that from their homes as well. And more recently, I'm working on a project that's looking at tikanga values and virtues that can guide adult intimate relationships as well. So again, a kind of a challenging space, but a very uplifting space as well. So talking to people, talking to whānau, talking to health professionals, and talking to cultural experts and around, what are the tikanga values and virtues that can guide us to have really, really good, flourishing, happy, healthy relationships for this generation and moving on to other generations as well. So I guess I position myself as a kairangahau. I firmly believe that the expertise really sits with people and in our communities, not necessarily within the ivory towers of universities as well. So that really orientates me to a particular way of sitting alongside people, and I think that really, really guides the interview space, as well as really positioning people as the expert of their experiences. So I'm kind of like a vehicle or a tool just to carry their story and their insights and to be able to share them with others. Yeah, kia ora. And I'm going to pass it over to Kimiora maybe.
So in terms of also the researches that I've undertaken, so I've done the spectrum of individual to whānau groups, to focus groups, to couples, whanaunga, professionals, nurses, teachers, etc. I do just want to say that I interviewed a couple once that it went a little bit awry because they started arguing, and then she told them to get out during the interview, and I was like, oh, this isn't working well. But I mean, you got to be open to things happening in interviews, and I found that to be quite funny. In terms of where I've interviewed different types of situations, I've interviewed quite a lot on marae because that's my comfortable space. I have to say I'm not fluent in te reo Māori, but I get by, and I think that actually makes me a bit personable in some ways for some of my interviewees that, we just find a comfortable space to interview together, me and my fluency, and also on the marae space. I've interviewed in cafes, noisy cafes, classrooms, libraries, and the weirdest place I've interviewed, I'll just share this, was actually in a hospital, by someone that was injured in the bed, and it was a Pākehā research project, and they wanted me to go into the hospital and do these type of interviews. But that's when I've kind of learned, one of the lessons I've learned is to actually see if I feel comfortable with that myself. And then, like as Kiri said, she does sensitive types of interviews. I do not. If people know me, I'm not comfortable with too much emotion. I can't cope. My backpacks I can do. So I make sure that I stay in situations where I feel comfortable, they feel comfortable, and I'm not getting situations that are out of my depth and don't fit well with my modi, because I would not like to be in a situation where I'm gathering information that I can't really deal with in a positive manner or do things with. So that's how I work, is that I don't do sensitive. It's not that I do light and fluffy subjects, but I just do things that I have a link with, that I have an understanding with. And so I make sure to stick in my space because that's where the passion sits. I just want to say I've also done a plethora of interviews in terms of time. I usually do about an hour to 2 hours, but I just want to share another story because this is what I'm all about. I actually did an interview once that took all day. And it took all day because I went to Hawaii Waititi to do an interview, and the guy wanted to do a pōhiri. He wanted to do, and then he had a group coming on, and he wanted me to stay around, and he would not let me go, and I had to have lunch, and we had to go for a walk, and I was like, okay, I'll go with the flow. But I mean, it was a great interview, and I probably used about 2 paragraphs within the kōrero, but it was a really good link, and I had a great day there. I've done also a whole range of interviews as well in my workspace, which is my particular research topic, which is about marae, which is about our environment. I've done kaumātua interviews, which are my favourite. My favourite type of interviews in the kōrero that you get from kaumātua interviews. I've not done small children. I think I might have difficulty with under 13-year-olds, maybe, but yeah, so that's kind of like the range of what I've done. And I've done walking interviews because I did a study on marakai, on marae, and the best place to do that is while they're gardening. And it was great. It was really great. And I got teased a lot because I don't actually garden. And someone made me, because you know the whole thing about kaupapa moulding is gumboots, kaputi and gumboots. I was made to put on gumboots and go and work in the garden. I was like, oh. But no, it was fun. Another fun one. So I like to link with my interviewees, that temperature thing, and I like to create a relaxing atmosphere to get good kōrero and to always find rapport with who I'm interviewing as much as possible. It's not always possible, but for the most part, I have found it possible. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kimiora. That time thing's really interesting because there's also vox pop interviews which can be super, super short. You know, they can be one question, like asking people at the train station trying to get to work, who are you going to vote for in the next election, or something, you know, just one question. So a day to 2 seconds is sort of the the time parameters you can work with. I'm interested in the and please, if anyone's got any questions, I will stop asking some soon. But if you've got questions, just chuck up your hand and we'll go straight to you, or put them in the chat. But I was interested in the sensitive stuff. Is what do you think you could put in place if you were interviewing someone? Like, what, it's sort of, I guess this is an ethical question. What do you think we need to put in place to support people if they are talking about something and it kind of raises something, you know, upsetting or whatever?
Yeah, that's a really important consideration, I think. And I always think about like our tikanga, which is just as important, or not, you know, it has such important protective properties within the Rangahau space as well. And I feel like what a lot of our institutions call ethics is actually just a really, really small part of that tikanga. And for me, it's really thinking carefully about how we are going to prioritise the people that we're sitting alongside. What are they going to need from us to prepare themselves in terms of talking about the kaupapa? So that's kind of before we even enter into that space. And then also, so within my, you know, the information sheets and the consent sheets and things like that, is particularly in the bereavement related research that I worked in, is I went through and found some local helping agencies that specialised in that space. So I compiled a bit of a list for people as part of that ethical process. And another thing that I did too was also following up with them afterwards. So just checking to make sure that they had been able to find their maurito again, that the Rangahau interview hadn't brought up any issues with them, and checking in with them in around that as well. And I think that's really, really important as I think about the relationships, that whakawhanaungatanga that we build. It's an ongoing, enduring thing. So, you know, lots of preparation in terms of warming that relationship, making sure it's comfortable and safe for me as well as the people that I'm engaging with as well. But that relationship, that connection that I build, it happens, you know, it is established and then it keeps on going past the interview space as well. And I think that's a really, really important supportive but also protective kind of process for me as the kairangahau, but most importantly for the contributors that are sharing with us, you know, really sensitive, really emotional experience as well. So trying to wrap around that, it's not just McDonald's drive-through in terms of me coming up, getting that information and then driving off in my car, is that relationship happens, it's being established and built well before that actual Rangahau kōrero takes place and well beyond it as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Kiri. Kimiora, did you have anything more? You started to talk a little bit about gumboots and getting in and digging mara, but were there any other thoughts you had about how do you kind of look after and build those relationships with participants?
Not too much to expand on that. Just to further reiterate that whole thing about rapport, and keeping in mind that people are sharing a very precious taonga with you, and you've got to think about that, treasure it, and also in some cases have cues for yourself about when to stop it, because sometimes you don't actually want overshare because you might be getting too much information and they've gifted you with too much. This is possible. So sort of having good cues that you've set about how to contain it, because I always feel a sense of responsibility when we're interviewing what we're grabbing and what we're going to be doing with it. And I would never want someone to feel like they've overshared and that it's just gone away into the air and nothing happens. So I try and have cues where I can just sort of get it a little bit. Sometimes if it goes too far in a direction or it's too much, sort of like indicate that no, we'll try and keep to the chosen path, the agreed path. And for my interviews, I always make sure that there's information sheet. They know exactly where we're going and what this is about. And I think those kind of processes are quite important before interviews, is setting that sort of platform for how the interview is going to go. So they're very much aware, not that everyone always reads it, but they're very much aware of what the purpose is and how we're going to get there and what it means before, during and after the interview.
Awesome. That's a great point about once you've got the kōrero, you're sort of responsible for it, right? And if you've got stuff that you don't use, it feels like you've wasted their time or you've wasted their kōrero.
Sorry, Becky. I just wanted to share one other experience I had that was really, really formative for me. Is thinking about, like, when we go in and we talk to people, is we're shining a light on them, we're putting them on a stage, so it's all eyes on them, kind of in that space. But I remember I wanted to interview Nick Tūwhāngai, really significant elder in amongst my iwi, and very forthright. So I had sent him a letter, I had sent him the information sheet and the consent sheet and all the rest of it. I'd ticked off all my boxes, and then Uncle Nick rang me early one morning and basically proceeded to interview me before he was willing to agree to be interviewed as part of the Rangahau. And it was a very vulnerable experience. I had to just be really honest and real with him in such a way that, yes, we're honest and real in an information sheet and a consent form and that type of thing. But I actually thought, even though it was really, really uncomfortable for me, and I had to kind of think on the fly very much, is that lesson is something that I've really, really held, and I think that we should, as kairangahau, we should be prepared and able to be interviewed by the people before they agree to engage it with us in that space. So yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora, Kiri. Makes me think about discussions we used to have a bit about, written consent versus verbal consent, and whether, sometimes people get quite suspicious having to sign things, and actually that process of him interviewing you was much more robust than giving him a form to sign. So that, has all sorts of implications for the way the Western world at least sees ethics and consent being valid. Anyway, something for us to keep thinking about in relation to our ethics process. But we've got something from Tara. I did an interview recently as an interviewee, and I did it as a favour, and it was really bad. There was no care for me or the difficult kaupapa we were talking about, and then the way they interpreted my kōrero was not right either. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Tara? Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah, yes. I just, I guess because it's kind of from the other end of the spectrum, and I don't think, this would happen for any, it was Parkour researchers basically interviewing me about some experiences of racism that I'd had, and then so she kind of did the interview. I, had to talk about some not nice stuff, and then that was it. And then a few months later, she emailed me what she had written about my kōrero, and basically it was about women's experience of in the media. So, she interviewed people like Susie Wiles, and then she also talked to me, and I was the only Māori person. And when I talked to her, I was talking to her mostly about racism, not sexism. But the way that she had interpreted it as a researcher was like completely missed the point. And so I was really, I don't know, I was kind of like, I'm never doing an interview with these people again, because I was really unimpressed by the whole process. And I think, just to say that, I think what James has explained is a completely different process than the one that I experienced.
Yes. Cool. Thanks for that, Tara. And I guess just to follow on from that, any one of the three of you, can I ask, what would you do to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen? Because we're all overlaying our view of the world. None of us are objective, as we all know. What are some mechanisms you could use to make sure that stuff doesn't happen? Shall I start? Can I go back to you, James?
Yeah. Because that just reminded me of something, actually, I think I was talking to Kiri about previously, is that when I first kind of started my research, so my first research experience was really through my PhD, and back then I kind of learned, I do my interview and then I send the transcript of my interview to my participants so they can see what they've said. And I think Kiri was saying, they know what they've said, they were there. and so I think there's, thinking about the actual next step and sending them what you're going to do with that kōrero. So, here's your kōrero, and this is how it's kind of played out in amongst some of the other kōrero I've heard, and these are some of the kind of draft themes that are coming through, and getting feedback from your participants then, rather than what they've literally said. I think that's a really important thing.
Great.
Newly learned. Yeah.
Anything else from Kiri or Kimiora to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just to my point earlier, which was really, sort of positioning, how I position myself, and thinking about sitting alongside my contributors, and then through the Rangahau process is bringing that to life and demonstrating that. In the way that I've been trained and in the way that I've been mentored is, I'll do an interview, I'll go away and I'll do up the transcript, which James has mentioned is, that's verbatim of what's been said. And then what I do with that transcript is that I turn it into what, it's like a draft case study, really. And at that point, I turn that over to the contributor, so the person who has shared that story with me, and I give them, reminding them, or it's an opportunity to demonstrate their ownership of that kōrero. So I give them full editorial license to take anything out, to make revisions, to make amendments, to add anything that they want in there. And my role is really just the editor, if you like, is to take care of those things as well. So what we do as kairangahau is we gather information or data, and then we're going to go away and we're going to make sense of it, or we're going to draw out meanings, or i.e. data analysis. So we need to make sure, in my training, in my space, is making sure that our contributors still continue to have the opportunity in that. And again, there's no surprises exercises and that. And I think, thinking about Tara's experience, which was really, really unfortunate, is, it wasn't a great space for her within the interview space that was created, but equally, if they had sent back a draft for her, she would have had the opportunity there to amend and correct the misinterpretation of her kōrero, and I think that that's really important as a means of respect and honouring too, in terms of who we're working with in that Rangahau space.
Kia ora, Kiri. Kimiora, anything more to add to that? No? Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks, Tara. That's a great bad example. And off the back of that, Alex has a question here, Pātai. Could the panel please share an experience of recovery? That's a great question. During an interview process or even a failure. Shall we go to you, Kimiora?
Is it because you think I've had lots of failures?
No.
I'm just joking.
No, I was just trying to spread the kōrero around.
Kapai. I'm just thinking about, so I gather, Alex, what you're asking is when something has gone wrong in an interview. I haven't had too many experiences of anything going too much out of whack for me. Like James, I kind of position myself in the semi-structured and flexible and adaptable kind of interview setting. So if things go wrong, well, then I go with, oh, well, that's the way it was meant to be. It will recover. But I have had a growling during an interview, and I was interviewing a kaumātua tāne, and we sort of, I got into the interview, and he actually wanted to go through a full mihi process, which when I sat down, I thought that I had got the impression that we were just going to start and just go straight into the interview, and it sort of took me back to, I should have really thought about properly who I was interviewing and a proper process for interviewing someone that might want of the formalities with PPR and all that kind of stuff. So, it sort of gave me a bit of a wake-up call to just remember that some of my interviewees will want the full sort of process, and some just want you to jump straight in, because I've also had interviewees where they don't want to have a karakia, they don't want to have anything else, they just want to get straight into it. And I can still build rapport and I can still continue, but it's like that temperature thing. Sometimes I've just got to go in and try and think for myself what they want. And I have got it wrong and I have got a growling, but I've also got a thick skin. And I just continue onwards, and I've never had anyone get up and leave an interview, be annoyed with me, or refuse to share the interview kōrero. It's all been manageable because, like I say, I sit very much in that semi-structured, flexible type of space.
Kia ora, Kimiora. James or Kiri? Anything to add to that?
I can just think of logistic ones, probably from my experience. So how Kimiora was talking about the duration earlier, and I was just thinking, most of the interviews I've done are at least one-on-one or pairs, between kind of 45 minutes and 2 hours. And I felt like I had a bit of a failure once when I interviewed someone and I kind of run through my skeleton structure in about 15 minutes. They were just like firing all these one-word answers to all my questions, and it was really hard to kind of draw anything more out. And I got to the point where I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll keep going and I'll keep persevering and I'll write it up and everything and treat him the same as every other participant and stuff. But it just meant it, didn't quite add as much to the Rangahau overall as some of the other participants. But so that felt like a bit of a failure at the time.
Yes. Just thinking about logistics, one big failure is not having the recording device work. And I've never had it fail completely, but I have had it so that I couldn't actually hear very well the answers. And so really simple things like having 2 recording options on the go is really useful. And that might be your phone and a recording device, or 2 recording devices, just so that you've got a bit of backup, because it's the worst thing having spent, an hour or 2 hours and then realising you don't actually have very good recording or a recording at all of whoever you've talked to. Just linking back to Sasha's question. Sasha, do you want to talk a bit more about this? Because I think this is a fascinating one. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I'm just not on a camera, so I don't give you motion sickness as I move around.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that it brings out my inner growly auntie. And this was particularly around Ngāi Tahu's response to the earthquake. There were lots of young researchers, international researchers who wanted to write things. And because all of Ngāi Tahu and the wider Māori network's beautiful work hadn't been profiled, it really made me grumpy, really, really grumpy. That people would come in with an expectation that they had a right to tell that story. And I think, that kind of reflexive positioning and how you serve has got to be baked into the beginnings. And so I would send them away until they had solved the puzzle of how they were going to ensure that the standing and the credit landed where it was due. And that meant there were some interviews I didn't do because their responses were less than satisfying.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's so many examples of people getting mana off the back of Māori who they've interviewed, right? Like there's so many examples of that. And I remember at Vic seeing Pākehā academics becoming internationally known as Indigenous experts because they happened to write a few papers with some Māori words in them, essentially. I'm being slightly facetious, but it's a great point. And I think that's one of the things we've got up our sleeve, hopefully, at the Wānanga, is that most of us are pretty embedded in understanding, I would hope, how these things should work. But yeah, a very good cautionary tale there, I think. Maybe what's our time? We're up to 12. I'll ask maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we can see if there's any more from our audience, and then we'll go from there. We've already talked a bit about the practical stuff. We've talked about some mistakes. What aspects of the interview process were you initially naive about? No, I don't want to ask that one. Sorry, I found a better one. What role does co-construction of knowledge play in interviews? So I guess this is linked a bit to what Sasha's saying there, but I'd be keen to understand that a little bit more from our panel. Kiri, can we go to you?
Kia ora, Becky. Really, really important one. And I think, again, is, thinking about contributors as collaborators, as co-authors. And so you're building this understanding together. And I think I remember in my, in the bicultural bereavement research as well, is it actually, that I had contributors really thank me for that opportunity. So they were able to read the story that was theirs. But for some of them that had experienced some really challenging, really hurtful aspects, is it actually provided them an opportunity to heal in terms of stepping back and being able to read their story and also being able to contribute in it as well. So we've kind of got this meaning making happening in the Rangahau space, but also on the personal level too. And I think too is that it keeps a real good check on you as a kairangahau as well, about the assumptions, the things you hear within an interview, and actually the things that you don't hear as well. So by being really vulnerable and handing that mahi over, that case study to the person that's voiced it, to the contributor, is all that kind of gets laid bare. And again, it's a very much a safety aspect. And I want to share one experience I had, which was really significant for me because it was really, really uncomfortable. Is I'd gone through that process, interviewing someone about their bereavement experience, and we were getting ready I was going to do my first conference presentation at the Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga IIRC, and we had a little closed sort of seminar at the University of Waikato to kind of practice. Anyway, my supervisors told me to invite the contributor along to sit in the audience in that presentation. And that is probably one of the most uncomfortable, vulnerable experiences I've had as a kairangahau, as a presenter in a conference, in an upcoming conference. And really that to me showed me the importance of getting it right, being aware of your own biases, your own hearing. And it's often something I think of when I'm working with people's pūrākau, with their kōrero, as I think about how would this person or how would this organisation feel if they were in a room and I was up presenting that. And I think that's super, super important. Really, really keeps me in check. And I think just harking back to that kind of ongoing, enduring relationship that I've had is, we go through ethics, we've got consent, I've gathered your interview, I've turned it into this, it's in my PhD, and technically I can go out and I can present that at a conference, kei te pai. But again, with that respect and thinking of yourself as a kaitiaki, not an owner of that kōrero, is whenever I'm preparing to go to a conference and I'm pulling on contributors' kōrero, is I go back to them and I let them know that it's coming, ask them how they feel about that, and I also circle back to them as well and talk to them about how the presentation went, and where appropriate and where safe. I'll talk to them about some of the feedback that was given too, and really it's a koha, it's a gifting back, because often the reason why a lot of people will be involved in the type of rangahau that I do is because they want to help to make a difference. And so that's an opportunity for them to be a continuing part of the rangahau, and I think that's really, really important. So that's that, that ongoing, enduring relationship and the opportunities for that co-authorship that comes right from the kōrero that we share and whatever else happens to it after that. And I think that is a really unique and really important part of rangahau, of kaupapa Māori methods, because I don't think you often see it in other spaces. Yeah.
Kia ora, Kiri. Just while we're on that, Mike, James, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? No. Kimiora?
Hi, just on the co-constructing of knowledge, I just want to share that one of the methods that I found to be really good is, it sounds really technical, but it's not really. It's cognitive mapping while interviewing. And that's just like having a big sheet of paper, and while you're interviewing and you're constructing knowledge together and ideas, that you just write the main themes together and you put off little points, and then they put points, and you highlight things and you circle things, and you come back, and it's very creative and very involving of each other. And it's one of my favourites because I'm more of a visual. If I see things written there and as prompts, I actually enjoy that. And so, and not everyone is comfortable with it, but for the most part, it's really a good way of keeping track of a kōrero and the ideas that shoot from ideas, and then bringing it back and actually mapping it on a piece of paper. So I see that as a very co-constructive way of getting kōrero together. Kia ora. And the other thing is I wanted to just say along with Kiri is in the sharing and co-constructing of knowledge, I've had the experience of being at a conference myself and giving a presentation and utilising the first option, which is really to keep our participants anonymous. And I did that in a conference, and my whanaunga was actually there, my auntie was there, like Kiri, but she said, "Ko tira, why am I not named? I said that. Why is my name not there? Everybody, that was me. It was a good thought, wasn't it?" And I was like, oh my gosh, I followed a sort of that method of just not naming, because, the whole, and I don't want to harp on about this, but the whole Pākehā concept of not being named and being anonymous. But in actual fact, when our whanaunga and our people say really good things, sometimes they want to be attributed to it, and we have to give that option. So with some of my later research, I actually changed and said, do you want to be named? Because they're very proud of these statements. They're very proud of their ideas, and it is. And if you're looking at that co-constructing of knowledge, well, then acknowledge that they've said it. And so my auntie was sort of like, oh, well, when you put it in your reports, make sure you say it was your auntie that said this, and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, oh, kapai, I'll do that. So I think what sets us apart when we're doing our interviews in terms of kaupapa Māori as well is different ways of thinking about how we name or identify things, and how we're a little bit more open, and also the co-constructing side of it, the collective side of it. I think it's really important and sets our research apart. But like Kiri says, you've got to get it right though, because you don't want to quote someone incorrectly. But that can take a little bit backwards and forwards. But so there's quite often, as I've gone on now, I actually name people in my research, especially when they say, yes, that's me, and I love it. Wasn't that a good statement?
Awesome. Thanks, Kimiora. Any other pātai from the audience? I've got a final one, but I just want to make sure everyone's had an opportunity who wants to ask anything.
Can I ask something, Becky?
Go for it, Tim.
I think it's already been addressed a little bit in a number of the other kōrero, but I was wondering if you might be able to comment on the balance between going into an interview with a preconceived notion or idea of what you want the interview to be, versus keeping it fluid enough to allow the interviewee not to feel like they're being grilled or being pushed with a preconceived idea. Yeah.
Cool. Can we go to you, James?
Yeah. That's a good question. Cheers, Tim. Because my brain initially went to that kind of the beauty of at least a semi-structured interview or unstructured, and having that flexibility to kind of meander and go where the conversation is going as well is important. But so is the framing of the questions as well. So trying to not necessarily ask leading questions either in your interviewing. So not starting off with something like, oh, that thing over there is really bad, eh? Like trying to kind of stay a bit neutral, perhaps, about the topic to see, so you're not leading an answer to your preconceived idea of where it could go either.
Cool. Kiri, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that, and it is a tension that I guess there's a couple of things that guide me in around that. One is kind of appreciating that, particularly the Rangahau kōrero, it kind of has a mauri of its own, it has a life of its own, and I might be able to sort of nudge it in a particular direction, but it's not mine to control. So sometimes it's just sitting with it and trusting kind of in the process, which is very, very difficult, I think. When you're there, you've got your questions, you want to do your do and all the rest of it. But I have had it happen in the bereavement research. So I actually had a couple of interviews that I did, that I transcribed, that I did up into case studies, and actually started to realise that it actually wasn't a fit. And so, and having to work through that in a very respectful way. So it wasn't so much, no fault of the person that I was contributing. I had my recruitment criteria, if you like, and I had thought that this had met, but it wasn't kind of until after the fact that it wasn't so much, it wasn't necessarily a failure on my part, or it just wasn't the kōrero, the experience didn't quite fit into that as well. And so rather than me kind of, again, prioritising people over process, over rangahau, over whatever checklist that you happen to do, is, sitting in that space and thinking, okay, this may not kind of fit or work, but I need to be really manaaki and really respectful in the space with this person right now. Yeah.
Kia ora. Kimiora, did you have anything? No. So I wonder then if we might just end, if there's no more partai, just one more look around the room, so to speak. If you could each give us one piece of advice to someone about to conduct their first Rangahau interview, what would it be? You guys pick who goes first. Not Kimiora by the looks.
I'll go, but I'm gonna morph the question a little bit. So just one piece of advice and around conducting. So more, you've conducted your first interview, and I'll leave the others to pick up on that preparatory stuff. But one thing I think, great learnings to be had from, really sitting and self-reflecting in your process and your practice and your kōrero and transcribing your first interview. I think that's really important. So I'm a big fan of transcribing all my interviews because that allows me to get a jump on the data analysis and the meaning maker as I'm transcribing. So some of that thinking's already coming. And what I'm also doing is I'm really, really thinking about, I'm doing a kind of like a quality assurance check on myself and the interview space that I've created as well. So a little bit like some of James's key points as well. Am I talking too much? Am I keeping this rangahau, have I created a rangahau space? This is not just a kōrero between two people. So you soon learn when you're transcribing and you're having to transcribe kōrero from yourself that wasn't necessarily necessary, and that's, I think, a really good reflection point too. And always having an ear out for, I really liked, James bringing in Kiri Dowell's idea in around the warmth of the interview, because I think listening to the kōrero and transcribing it is a really good way for you to have a think about that, and there's realisations there that you won't get from just being in that space. Yeah, kia ora.
Just before James goes, and not to undermine the idea of transcribing yourself, because that is incredibly valuable. We do have access to some software called Kaituhi, developed by Te Huku Media. It's not perfect. It does require you actually to go through and still listen to the kōrero to make sure it's transcribed properly. But the great thing about it, it's the first transcription software that will transcribe te reo Māori well-ish. So we've got access to that. If anyone is doing rangahau and is, it is with reo speakers or there's some reo in there, we'd be very happy to give you access to Kaituhi. Sorry, over to you, James.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same kind of thing. I was thinking about the value of what Kiri was saying, the value of silences as an interviewer. So leaving that space in, and someone might be sharing some whakaaro and then go quiet, and being comfortable with letting it be silent for a little bit because they might continue that kōrero. When I look back at some of my earlier transcripts, I was just like jumping in and I was offering my 5 cents and I was like, oh yeah, that reminds me of this thing. And there was way too much of me in it. And then you're constantly, this was back before auto transcribing software as well. And you're constantly going this back and forth, and it was a nightmare. So for me, that's one thing I've tried to learn over time is that value of silence and letting things land for a little bit before jumping back in. But also the interviews are, I think, such a rich method as well. And so my other piece of advice for someone who's about to do one would be like, enjoy it as well. I think it's one of my favourite parts of the Rangahau process is that talking to people and hearing their kōrero.
Kia ora, James. Kimiora.
Ka pai. I just want to reiterate the whole enjoy interviewing. I love it. It's my favourite part of Rangahau. I love the kōrero. I love the stories of the ways of life, perspectives. Sometimes you get things that sort of you weren't expecting, and I love that. And I'm always thinking when I'm interviewing, where's the connection for us? And where's the rapport, how we connect. And I think that's what keeps me engaged, because if I had advice as well, it's don't disengage during an interview because it can be very off-putting for them and yourself. And also in a more pedantic level, and this is how I operate, is I have checklists. I have checklists like pre-interview, during interview and after interview. After experiences of doing interviews, I like to sort of go through my tick box and make sure I've got everything, my double recording devices, the right questions, the koha, the pihikiti. I've actually got a travelling little picnic basket that I sometimes take for interviews that's got the tea making, the old enamel cups. I've got all that because that usually sparks up good conversation. The gumboot tea, all that kind of stuff. So I like the I love listening to our people talk, and I can remember one particularly good interview out at Ihumātao where they talked about the fruit orchards back in the day and how you could walk, like the, no fences, how you walked around your neighbourhood and just went to different houses and picked fruits off trees and hung out with your cousins in the trees, and you ate off you ate fruit directly off the trees and everything, and then your auntie called everyone into one house and you all ate there, then you ran into the fields and played and then went to someone else's house, and I was like, oh, what a fascinating story. I would have loved to have spoken the rest of the day about that feeling of living on your papa kāinga and that sharing, and the aunties and the uncle on the tractor putting all 10 kids on the back and taking them up the road to the shop. It was just, and I was like, at the moments like that where I can connect and it makes me feel it's my absolute favourite. So just enjoy it. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kimiora. Just on that, it seems like we're about to design some Te Manawa Haukura travelling kōrero picnic kete. And it does need malopus in it. You're quite right, Tara. When I was at the design school, we designed a travelling symposium setup, which had a what do you call it? Lectern on wheels and speakers and fake grass and stuff and seats and things, so you could set up your little symposium wherever you liked in the middle of a park or whatever. So maybe we need to develop a range, a Te Manawa Haukura Rangahau range. But what we do have in stock is recording devices. And so if anyone does need recording devices for your Rangahau, Joe here on the screen is the person to ask. How many have we got, Joe? I can't remember how many we've got. 6-ish or something?
Yeah, something like that. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Cool, yeah. And if there's heaps of need, we can also get in some more. We've also got little iPads, actually, as well. So if people are wanting to do interviews with drawing, like Kimiora was talking about, on a digital form, we've got those too. So we can lend those out to anyone who's wanting to do stuff like that. But I just wanted to say thank you very much, James, Kiri and Kimiora. That was fabulous, a fabulous workshop. Thank you for your mātauranga, and thanks everyone else for your whakaaro and your pātai. And really cool hearing those slightly alarming in some cases examples of real life problems around how when interviews don't go well. So hopefully that was really informative for those of you who have are relatively new to the interviewing game, or even if you're not relatively new. And next week we have Heidi is not. Yes, she's. Oh, we've got Kimiora talking about photo voice. Is that right? So photo voice is another method, so not to be missed.